Good morning, everyone. My name is Carlos Núñez Mercado, and today I will talk about male and female students' use of discourse markers. First of all, I will describe the outline of the presentation. I will begin with revising some authors about language and gender and discourse markers classification. Then, I will proceed to explain the methodology used in this research, which was corpus linguistics. Finally, I will present the findings and discussion and some recommendations for further research. According to Say and Highland, most research on language and gender have been carried out, especially in spoken discourse. In this sense, lack of conclusions in terms of male dominance discourse over woman, as well as Tanning's theory of male having a report discourse and female having a rapport discourse are pioneer studies in language and gender differences. Social factors such as power and dominance in the context in which language is produced are considered in these studies. Consequently, Eckert mentions that language and gender nowadays tend to focus on social situations. For instance, school students' community, in which discourse is produced and the gender variables that arise are considered as style components, so as to analyze distinctive features of masculinities and femininities. In academic contexts, especially academic writing, which is the main focus of this research, Say and Highland argue that differences between male and female discourses were found by scholars in terms of interactional styles. That is to say, female students have an inclination to use more affiliative and less objectifying style of argument, whereas males use more markers that denote certainty and show more self-assured style. The term cohesion is defined by Halliday and Hassan as a semantic relation between an element in the text and some other element that is crucial to the interpretation of it. In order to establish this type of semantic grammar connection, single and phrasal word conjunctions are needed. Halliday and Hassan classified in their study cohesion in English. These types of conjunctions in additive, adversative, causal, and temporal. A wide range of studies have been carried out in terms of using discourse markers in spoken and written corpora. When it comes to spoken corpora, Huang examines the use of well in Chinese English learners and comparing in terms of frequency with native speakers' corpus and Swedish learners' corpus. Findings show that Chinese learners use well differs from native speakers and Swedish learners in regard to frequency use, in which they show less use of well compared with native speakers, whereas Swedish learners demonstrated an overuse of this discourse marker. Other findings contribute in terms of placement of well, that is, at the beginning of the utterance, similar to native speakers, and some pedagogical implications which refer to teachers' lack of authentic speech exposure. Some other studies have implications in terms of how the use of discourse markers or cohesive devices impact L2 learners' academic writing. In terms of gender differences in discourse markers use, Azaribu mentions that there is not an agreement among scholars whether gender differences affect the use of discourse markers, and research in context has not been extensively carried out. Highland assumptions about gender and discourse in professional identity, in which this variant is not seen as the main factor in influencing one's language, is another point of view that we have to take into account. The main objective of this inquiry was to discover the differences in the use of discourse markers in academic writing between female and male students who were enrolled at an online BA in ELT in Mexico. To this end, a corpus was built which consisted of a sample of research papers written by students. The following questions were addressed. What are the main tendencies in the use of discourse markers based on Halliday and Hassan classification, additive, adversative, causal, and temporal in female and male students' research papers? Are these tendencies statistically significant when comparing both corpora, that is, male student corpora and female student corpus? What is the linguistic and social meaningfulness that the findings of this study provide when it comes to the use of discourse markers explored? Corpus linguistics is considered a methodology rather than part of linguistics such as syntaxis, semantics, and pragmatics, and so forth. In corpus linguistic research, language use in different areas and levels is analyzed. The use of computer software is a core element in corpus linguistic methodology, which provides reliability and accuracy and enables researchers to analyze a wide range of text within minutes or even seconds. Yet, it is important to bear in mind the scope that computers have in this area of research. Computers can reliably perform part-of-speech analysis and calculate word frequency, concordance lines, and collocational information among other linguistic patterns. According to McInerney and Wilson, the building process of a corpus embraces four main hallmarks. Sampling and representativeness, which consists in building a sample of the language or variant of a language that researchers are interested in. It must provide a wide picture of the tendencies of the language variation that will be analyzed, including its proportions. Finite size of the sample, that is to say, the number of texts that should be included in the sample, which often involves a wide range of text words. The detailed description of how the sample was done, as well as the number of samples and the number of words that the corpus will in construction will constitute. A machine-readable format, which means that the term corpus is commonly associated with machines. Moreover, another advantage is that further information can be added to this format, such as part-of-speech tagging. And finally, a standard reference, which is not considered essential to the definition of a corpus, and yet there is an implicit agreement that corpus is a standard reference of the language variation that it represents. This last hallmark, however, is commonly associated with extensive corpus. In this research, a corpus was built on a repository of research papers from an online VA in ELD located in the southeast of Mexico. The sample and representativeness were determined in terms of the number of the research papers written by male and female students so that its proportions were delimited. Viva states that the most essential element that defines the representativeness based on sampling theory is a detailed description of the target population and the decision-making process done during the collection of the sample rather than the size of the sample. In terms of corpus design, the type of language that this corpus seeks to represent is the student's academic writing from an online BA in ELD. The sampling frame of this research corpus was built on 26 texts, 12 written by male students and 14 written by female students, which were selected randomly, and the total number of words was 209,246. It was divided in two subcorpora, female students corpus and male students corpus, which comprise 105,875 words and 103,371 words, respectively, so as to obtain a balanced corpus. A cleaning process of the sample was carried out by the researchers, which consisted in systematically removing covers, references, appendixes, quotes, interview extracts, graphics, and images from the 26 texts. This study examined the discourse markers used by female and male students, categorized by Halliday and Hassan as additive, adversative, causal, and temporal, which include words or phrases that enable conjuncture relations. Different levels of analysis in corpus linguistics are needed in order to analyze data. The first dimension, as Bresina suggests, has to do with data exploration and the main tendencies in the data. To this end, Langsbox version 6.0, a corpus analysis software, was used, while the tool used for searching frequency terms was the keyword in context, as we can see in the following image. For example, if we search the word bot, it provides the number of occurrences, the number of texts that this word appears, and in this case was 14 out of 14. The name of a corpus, in this case was the female student's corpus, name number 8, and you can choose the number of words displayed to the left and right of the word of interest, that is the node. This analysis resulted in 4 tables that depict the number of frequencies and main tendencies per 10,000 words that were found when it comes to using additive, adversative, causal, and temporal discourse markers. The second dimension of corpus linguistics analysis is statistical significance, which involves carrying out a statistical test to determine if there is enough evidence to refute the null hypothesis. To this end, Bayes' factor big was used. Wilson states that Bayes' factor is a measure of the amount of evidence provided by the test against the null hypothesis. In other words, what is the probability that a particular difference in frequency has occurred by chance? Therefore, its goal is to highlight those lexical items or other linguistic constructs, such as part-of-speech categories or semantic fields, which are most distinctive of one text or corpus when compared against another. The last dimension is linguistic interpretation or linguistic and social meaningfulness. This relates to the findings of the study to our understanding of language and society so as to interpret the results. The findings of this research are presented based on Bresina's dimension of corpus analysis. The first dimension, data exploration, embraces 4 tables that show the frequencies of the main tendencies in the corpora when it comes to using discourse markers based on Halliday-Hasan classification. Table 1 illustrates the use of additive discourse markers by male and female students. The frequencies found in Table 1 show that there are some differences in terms of frequency in the use of discourse markers, furthermore, in addition and in other words. Corporate data analysis shows that male students tend to use more those conjunctive items than female students. That is, a total of 38 occurrences of furthermore, which means 3.68 per 10,000 words. In addition, 6.58. In other words, 2.52 per 10,000 words, in comparison with 2.46, 3.21, and 0.76 per 5,000 words in the female student corpus. When it comes to adversative discourse markers, as it is depicted in Table 2, there were 9 occurrences of yet in female students, which means 0.85 per 10,000 words, whereas male students' corpus show 3 occurrences, that is 0.29 per 10,000 words. On the other hand, in fact and actually, were discourse markers utilized more by male students, that is 16 occurrences and 17 occurrences, in comparison with female students, 4 and 7 occurrences, respectively, in both corpus. In Table 3, causal classification, it was found that the occurrences of so, for, and because are higher in the female students' corpus, that is to say, 144, 870, and 305, whereas male students using 65, 717, and 111. 83 respectively. Finally, in temporal classification, as it is demonstrated in Table 4, male students showed that use secondly more than female students, 11 in contrast to 3 occurrences, while it was observed that the discourse markers then presented more occurrences in the female students' corpus, 59 compared with male students, as can be seen in the table. Based on the previous data exploration on discourse markers, we can proceed to test the hypothesis female students differ with male students in the use of yet, so, for, because, and then. And the second hypothesis, male students differ with female students in the use of furthermore, in addition, in other words, in fact, actually, secondly. This level of analysis, I mean the statistical dimension, was calculated by base factor big, which determines if the difference between two groups is statistically significant. To this end, the effect size calculator developed by Rayson was used to test the null hypothesis. According to Rayson, the interpretation of the base factor can be measured based on the following degree of evidence to refute the null hypothesis, and as can be seen in the table. Considering this criterion, the following table illustrates the results of testing the null hypothesis. There is no difference between male and female students when it comes to the use of furthermore, in addition, in other words, in fact, actually, secondly, yet, so, for, because, and then. Based on these tests, it can be concluded that there is no significant difference in the use of discourse markers between male and female students. 4 out of 5 discourse markers occurrences tests were in favor of the null hypothesis, and only one resulted to have a slight difference in use, thus there is no sufficient evidence to refute the null hypothesis. As can be seen, there is no difference between male students' use when it comes to using yet, for, and then, since they tested in favor of the null hypothesis. However, in terms of using so and because, the results indicated 16.50 and 15.72, which means very strong evidence against the null hypothesis. Therefore, it can be said that there is enough statistical evidence to claim that the hypothesis female students differ with male students in the use of discourse markers, so and because, is significant. For the last donation, and compare the results of this study to gain further understanding to the use of language with other L2 learning contexts. Although most of discourse markers studied in this research presented no difference in use between female and male students, the fact that so and because resulting in statistical significance has some gender implications that were not found in other studies. Passer reviews states that male and female students have similar use of discourse markers. In fact, her study so and because were used more by male students than female students. However, this study focused more on functions rather than occurrences and statistical significance differences. Although she states that the use of discourse markers saw in the Lindsay corpus learners of English resulting in no statistical significance between female and male students. When it comes to spoken language in advanced Iranian learners, Tabakoli and Karimina found that female students use more because than male students, and in fact it was the only causal discourse markers used by students. Finally, Tse and Hyland state that there is no one-to-one relation between gender and language when analyzing female and male academic book reviews, but also they state that where text has been examined for gender preferential language use, findings have been mixed and many studies have focused on differences in students' writing, which often display different patterns of those of experts. Therefore, it can be argued that this research demonstrated some differences between male and female students when using discourse microstyle and because, while other research contexts differ in their findings. Finally, for further research of this study, some pedagogical implications can be added or identified in the corpora in terms of functions, that is, how students are using these kind of discourse markers. We can also compare the results with similar corpus, such as the student academic writing corpora, that is the British Academic English Corpus, the BAWE, to see if the difference with native speakers that students have with native speakers in terms of using this kind of discourse markers. Finally, another objective that will impact the replicability of these studies will incorporate similar ELD programs and compare the results with this new corpus or corpora. Thank you.